Have you ever been invited on a trip that felt less like a vacation and more like a test of your worth? My daughter looked me straight in the eye and said, "Dad, don't worry about packing. You don't need clothes, just your passport and your credit card. We'll handle the rest." That was the moment I felt a knot in my chest, heavier than any suitcase I'd ever carried. At 79 years old, after losing my wife 6 years ago, I should have known better. But hope can blind even the most experienced eyes. My name is Franklin Mercer. I spent 4 decades as a financial advisor in Dallas, Texas. I wasn't rich like some of my clients who owned oil fields or skyscrapers, but I knew how to save, how to invest, and how to protect what I had. My late wife, Eleanor, always said I had the soul of a cautious man, but the faith of a bold one. She meant that while I checked every balance twice, I still believed in God, in family, in promises. When she died, mornings became quieter than I ever imagined. No soft footsteps on the kitchen tile, no scent of her cinnamon oatmeal, no voice saying, "Frank, don't forget your reading glasses." Just me, my Bible, and the empty chair across the table. I kept telling myself the Lord doesn't leave us alone, but some days it felt like even prayer echoed back at me. Claudia, my only daughter, filled the silence now and then, though not the way I'd hoped. Most of her calls were about Bill's tuition for Emily, or a new business idea her husband Miles had. I rarely said no. What else does a father do but give? But the giving started to feel less like love and more like a transaction. So when Claudia phoned one bright Wednesday morning and said, "Dad, Miles and I want to take you to Aspen. 2 weeks a villa with a mountain view. You deserve a change of scenery." I almost dropped the coffee mug in my hand. Aspen. I hadn't seen mountains since. Eleanor and I drove through Colorado in the early 70s in our rust-colored Cadillac. Back then, we couldn't afford more than a motel. Now my daughter was offering a villa worth $30,000 for 2 weeks. I asked why, all of a sudden. She sighed that impatient exhale I knew too well. "Because you never leave the house, Dad. You're turning into a hermit. It's not healthy. We just want you to enjoy life a little." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe this wasn't about money or appearances. I told myself maybe this was God's way of answering the prayers I'd whispered late at night, to be close to family again, to laugh at a dinner table that wasn't empty. But even before the trip began, the cracks showed. Claudia eyed my pressed slacks and said, "Please tell me you're not wearing those in Aspen. People dress differently there." I glanced down at my gray trousers, clean and neatly ironed. They'd been good enough for church, for client meetings, for Eleanor's funeral. Why not Aspen? Miles stayed silent, tapping away on his phone, but the smirk on his face said more than words. I felt small in my own kitchen, like a schoolboy being scolded before picture day. Still, I swallowed my pride. I told myself families have rough edges, that maybe I was too sensitive. Faith reminded me, forgive 70 times 7. Maybe this was just part of that equation. The morning of departure, I double-checked everything: Bible tucked in the side pocket, medication in a pillbox, a small photo of Eleanor slipped between the pages of Psalms. I carried not just luggage, but the hope that for once my daughter wanted me, not my checkbook. When the black Range Rover pulled into my driveway, shiny as if it had rolled straight off a showroom floor, my heart leapt. Claudia stepped out in a cream pantsuit, looking every inch the successful businesswoman. Miles didn't even glance back, just revved the engine. "Ready, Dad?" Claudia asked. "As I'll ever be," I answered, handing her my small suitcase. I locked the door behind me, not knowing if I'd ever walk back into that house the same man. Because deep down, beneath the hope, beneath the faith, I felt the uneasy truth. This wasn't just a trip to the mountains. It was a climb I wasn't sure they wanted me to survive. I'd love to know where you're watching this from. Drop a comment and tell me it reminds me that stories like mine reach hearts all over the world. The drive from Dallas to Aspen was supposed to feel like an adventure. Instead, it felt like a business trip I hadn't signed up for. Miles drove the brand new Range Rover like he was late to a board meeting, tapping the steering wheel to a rhythm only he heard. Claudia scrolled on her phone, giving me side glances like a supervisor checking an employee's work. Every now and then, they whispered to each other and laughed softly, and I sat in the back seat wondering if the joke was me. We stopped at a fine dining restaurant just outside of Amarillo. Crystal glasses, leather-bound menus, waiters in black vests. The kind of place I used to take clients when I wanted to impress them. I reached for my glasses to read the menu, but before I could, Claudia waved her hand. "Dad, maybe just get the soup and salad." Remember what happened with seafood last time I frowned? What last time? She smiled like a teacher correcting a child. You don't remember you got sick after shrimp. I hadn't eaten shrimp with her in years. I wanted to argue, but Miles cut in, "The pasta's safer, Franklin. Trust us." So they ordered for me. Soup and salad. Water instead of the red wine I'd asked for. And I sat there with my hands folded, my appetite gone, staring at the wine racks that climbed to the ceiling, bottles that cost more than my first car, while my own daughter acted like I couldn't handle a simple meal. By the time we reached Aspen, night had fallen. The villa they'd rented gleamed under soft lights perched high enough to look down on the valley. It had a heated driveway, stone arches, a glass balcony, and a view straight out of a luxury magazine. Miles beamed like a man proud of his purchase, even though it was only a 2-week rental. Inside, there were marble countertops, designer furniture, and a chandelier bigger than the dining table in my house back in Dallas. I ran my hand along the banister, thinking about how many retirement checks it would take to pay for just 1 week here. Claudia clapped her hands like a hostess. "So Dad, Miles, and I will take the master suite downstairs. It has the jacuzzi. You'll be upstairs, last door on the left." I dragged my suitcase up the staircase, knees aching, only to find my room was the size of a storage closet. No view of the mountains, just a narrow bed and a window that faced the garage. Meanwhile, I could hear Claudia downstairs squealing about the soaking tub, Miles uncorking a bottle of Napa Valley Cabernet, a $300 vintage if I wasn't mistaken. That night, I lay awake listening to the muffled sound of music from their suite. I thought about Eleanor and how she would have loved the mountains. She'd saved magazine clippings of cabins with big stone fireplaces, always saying one day we'd rent one for Christmas. We never did. Life was too busy, too practical. Now here I was in a villa she'd never see, treated like a boarder instead of family. The next morning, things got worse. At breakfast, I reached for my wallet to pay for groceries we'd picked up the night before. My credit card was gone. So was my passport, which I always kept tucked in a zippered pocket inside my bag. I searched every corner of my suitcase. Nothing. "Lose something?" Dad, Claudia asked, sipping her cappuccino like it was perfectly normal for her father to panic. My passport and card. They were in my bag. She exchanged a quick glance with Miles. "You probably misplaced them." "Don't worry, we'll help you look later." But they never did. Instead, they left me with a list of house rules. Don't touch the wine. Don't use the jacuzzi. Don't leave the villa without telling them first. I stared at the list written in Claudia's neat handwriting and felt like I had checked into a hotel where I wasn't a guest. I was the liability. That night I sat by the small window in my tiny room staring at the garage roof. The mountains were out there, snow-capped and endless, but I couldn't see them. All I could see was the reflection of my own tired face. And for the first time I asked myself, why did they really bring me here? On the fourth morning in Aspen, I woke to silence. No laughter, no clinking of glasses, not even the faint sound of Claudia humming in the kitchen. Just the cold mountain air slipping through the crack of a window. I shuffled downstairs expecting to see them by the stone fireplace. Instead, the living room was empty. On the marble counter sat a single sheet of paper folded once. I unfolded it with trembling hands. Dad, Miles and I are heading out for the day. Don't wait up. There are sandwiches in the fridge. Rest well. See. I stood there, paper shaking in my hands, staring at the rows of expensive wine bottles lined up in the glass cabinet behind me. A collection worth more than my first year's salary as a financial advisor. Yet they left me with cold sandwiches like a child too frail to sit at the table. I opened the fridge. 2 plastic-wrapped sandwiches on a porcelain platter. Nothing else. No fresh fruit, no warm breakfast. Just enough to keep me quiet. I sank into one of the leather chairs, the kind of chair clients used to sit in when they trusted me with their portfolios, the ones worth millions. Back then, I protected other people's futures. Now I couldn't even protect my own dignity. Hours crawled by. The villa was too large, too quiet, echoing with every footstep. I tried reading, but the words blurred. Tried napping, but the silence was louder than any noise. I finally stepped onto the balcony, the cold air hitting my face. From that height I could see the winding road below a ribbon carved into the mountains. No Range Rover, no sign of Claudia or Miles. Something in my chest told me this wasn't just a day trip. This was deliberate. That evening, they returned laughing loudly as if nothing had happened. Miles carried shopping bags from high-end boutiques in downtown Aspen, designer shoes, a silk scarf with the tag still dangling. Claudia wore new diamond earrings that caught the firelight like tiny sparks. "Did you rest well, Dad?" she asked sweetly, dropping her bags on the couch. I wanted to ask, why leave me behind? Why treat me like luggage? But the words froze in my throat. Over dinner, it got worse. They poured themselves glasses of the Napa Cabernet. For me, Claudia placed a glass of water. "It's better for your digestion," she said. Then in front of Miles, she added, "You know how Dad gets confused sometimes. Last week, he nearly forgot to turn off the stove." I slammed my hand against the table. That never happened. Miles smirked, slicing his steak with surgical precision. "Memory's a tricky thing at your age, Franklin. That's why we worry." I realized then what they were doing. Every comment, every invented story, it was a paper trail they were building in the minds of others. A record of a father too forgetful to trust, too confused to control his own money. I excused myself, retreating to my narrow room upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the Bible Eleanor had given me on our 40th anniversary. I opened it at random, my eyes landing on Isaiah, "Even to your old age and gray hairs, I am he who will sustain you." I whispered it aloud, gripping the worn leather cover. My daughter could strip me of credit cards, my son-in-law could spread lies, but they could not take away the truth of who I was, or the faith that anchored me. The next morning I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe I was overreacting. But when I went to check my suitcase, my passport was gone. The inner pocket, where I always kept it, was empty. I staggered back, clutching the suitcase like it had betrayed me. That was the final piece. The sandwiches, the lies, the missing documents. This wasn't about a vacation. It was about erasing me. Standing in that small garage-facing room, I looked in the mirror and said to myself, "They brought you here to disappear." And that's when I knew the real trip wasn't up the mountain. It was a descent. A descent into betrayal I never thought I'd see from my own blood. The morning after I discovered my passport was missing, I sat in that narrow room with the curtains half drawn. The sun lit up the garage roof outside my window, but it felt like I was in a cage. Claudia and Miles were downstairs laughing over fresh croissants and cappuccinos they hadn't offered me. I stared at the small leather Bible on my nightstand and thought, you can either sit here until they decide you're too helpless to leave, or you can stand up and write your own ending. So I stood. I slipped on my coat, the same wool jacket Eleanor once bought me at Neiman Marcus, a small luxury she insisted on during a rare splurge. I walked straight out the front door, no explanation, no permission asked. The mountain air bit at my face, but it tasted like freedom. At the tourist office in town, I explained my situation to a young clerk who looked at me with wide, worried eyes. She helped me buy a bus ticket to Denver with the only ID I had left, my driver's license. From Denver, I booked a flight back to Dallas using an emergency cash fund I'd hidden in my shoe, a habit from years of traveling for clients. When I walked through the door of my Dallas home 2 days later, the old clock on the wall ticked steady as ever. I sat beneath it, exhausted but alive with a new kind of clarity. I wasn't just a victim of neglect. I was the target of a scheme. The next morning, I went to the bank. My heart sank as the teller explained several withdrawals had been made from the joint account Claudia convinced me to open for convenience. Thousands gone. One attempted transfer of $50,000 had been flagged and frozen, but the smaller amounts were already missing. I clenched my cane so hard my knuckles ached. My own daughter had used my trust as a key to my vault. But fate, or maybe God's mercy, still had a card for me to play. When I sat down with my attorney, a man I'd mentored back when he was just cutting his teeth in finance, he flipped through the property records and smiled grimly. "Franklin, did you know you're listed as a 1/3 owner of Claudia and Miles's house in Houston?" I blinked. "What?" He slid the deed across the desk. There it was in black and white, my name clear as day. Apparently, when I gave them the down payment years ago, the bank required my signature as guarantor. They'd been so eager to close on their $1.2 million dream home that they hadn't noticed the clause that gave me equity. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of power return to my chest. "Can I do anything with this?" I asked. My lawyer's smile widened. "You can force a sale, Franklin. And you should." The plan formed: quickly file notice with the court, start the legal process to liquidate my share, and cut off every avenue they had to drain my resources. I also reported my missing credit card and had a new one issued immediately. Then I remembered something: Miles's Mercedes GLS 2023. He had parked it in my garage months ago, just until the paperwork cleared. It was still there untouched. I called the DMV and started the process of claiming it as abandoned property. Piece by piece, their fortress of control was about to crumble. That night, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea staring at Eleanor's photograph. I whispered, "You always said I had more fight in me than I believed." You were right. I wasn't going to let them erase me. Not in Aspen, not in Dallas, not anywhere. If you're still with me up to this point, drop a number 1 in the comments. I want to know who's walking beside me in this fight, step by step. The first thing my lawyer did was file notice to the court I intended to force the sale of the Houston property. It wasn't just a home, it was a mansion complete with a saltwater pool and marble foyer worth nearly $1.2 million. Claudia and Miles had been living there like royalty, throwing cocktail parties with my money. Now they would have to face the reality that a third of that palace didn't belong to them. It belonged to me. I also pushed forward with the abandoned vehicle claim. Miles's Mercedes GLS 2023, sleek and black with custom rims, sat untouched in my garage like a trophy no one cared to dust. After 60 days with no proof of ownership produced, the DMV approved my petition. The SUV was mine to sell. Within a week, a private buyer handed me a cashier's check for nearly $50,000. I can't tell you the satisfaction I felt watching that luxury machine roll down my driveway, no longer chained to their arrogance but converted into cash in my account. Money they thought they had in their grip was now fueling my freedom. Then came the banking cleanup. I closed the joint account Claudia had insisted on. In its place, I opened a new account in only my name and moved $42,000 into it. For the first time in years, I saw a balance that was mine alone, untouched by manipulation. Of course, Claudia and Miles didn't sit quietly. They hired their own lawyer and came after me with a different weapon, lies. Suddenly, rumors surfaced that I was slipping mentally, that I forgot to pay bills, that I repeated myself, that I wandered the grocery aisles like a lost child. It stung because it was so precise. These weren't wild accusations, they were small, believable cuts designed to bleed me in court. They filed papers questioning my competency, hoping a judge would strip me of authority and hand them control of my estate. I could have broken under the weight of it. At 79, it would have been easy to say I'm tired. Let them win. But something stirred deeper. One evening, sitting alone at my dining table, I opened Eleanor's old Bible again. The verse my eyes landed on was from Psalm 27. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" I whispered it into the quiet. I wasn't afraid of my daughter's schemes. I wasn't afraid of her husband's smirk. My faith reminded me I was not fighting alone, so I agreed to every test they demanded. Memory exams, logic puzzles, even basic math drills that felt insulting to a man who had once managed millions in client portfolios. But I aced them, every single one. The independent doctor appointed by the court shook my hand and said, "Mr. Mercer, you're sharper than most people, 20 years younger." When Claudia heard that report, her face turned the color of chalk. Miles muttered something about biased doctors, but the evidence was undeniable. I walked out of that courthouse taller than I had in years. My cane clicked against the marble floors like a drumbeat of victory. For the first time since Eleanor's passing, I felt more than just survival coursing through me. I felt strength. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about reclaiming what was mine, my voice, my dignity, my autonomy. The lies had been shattered, the truth written plainly in the court record. As I stepped outside, the Texas sun hit my face, and I thought faith carried me through their darkness. Now it will carry me through the rest of this fight. When the competency hearing ended in my favor, it was as if a heavy chain had snapped from around my neck. Claudia and Miles had bet everything on painting me as confused and unfit. But the court's ruling was clear. I was competent, capable, and in full control of my estate. The very next week, my lawyer filed the final paperwork to initiate the sale of the Houston mansion. That house, the one with the Italian marble foyer and the saltwater pool where they had posed for countless Instagram photos, was no longer untouchable. It was an asset and one I could liquidate. When Claudia heard, she called me, her voice sharp with panic. "Dad, you can't do this. That's our home." I took a deep breath. "No, Claudia. It's our home, and my share is worth $400,000. I'm done subsidizing a lifestyle built on lies." She sputtered, searching for a counter-argument. But the truth was on my side, backed by contracts and signatures she couldn't erase. 2 months later, the house sold for just over $1.2 million. My portion, $402,000 after fees, landed in my account. I remember staring at the numbers on the screen, hands trembling. For years, I'd felt like I was bleeding out, financially handing money to a daughter who saw me as nothing more than an ATM. Now, for the first time in decades, I was whole again. And then there was the Mercedes. That glossy black GLS 2023, once a symbol of Miles's arrogance, had been sold to a collector who wired me $48,000. Watching the SUV disappear down my driveway had been satisfying, but seeing that sum cleared into my bank account felt like justice in motion. Together, between the property and the vehicle, I had nearly $500,000 secured. At 79, I wasn't planning on building an empire, but I finally had what they had tried to steal from me: independence. Of course, they didn't surrender quietly. One afternoon, I was sitting at a cafe near the courthouse, sipping a latte, when Claudia stormed in with Miles trailing behind. Her voice carried across the room. "You've ruined us, Dad. Do you even realize what you've done?" I set my cup down carefully. Dozens of eyes turned toward us, the hum of conversation dying. I spoke softly, but my words cut through the air like a blade. "I didn't ruin you, Claudia. You did that yourselves when you chose greed over family. When you left me in Aspen with nothing but a sandwich and a lie. Don't you dare stand here and call yourselves victims." Miles sneered, but I noticed his hand tremble as he gripped Claudia's shoulder. For the first time, they weren't the ones in control. I stood, cane steady beneath me, and added, "You thought you could erase me with rumors and paperwork. But I'm still here. And I'm not afraid of either of you anymore." I left the cafe to the sound of murmurs, strangers watching a father reclaim his dignity in public. That night back home, I logged into my bank account again, just to see the numbers sitting safely there. They weren't just digits. They were proof. Proof that even when betrayed by your own blood, you can rise, you can fight back, and you can win without lowering yourself to their level. The battle wasn't over yet, but I had turned the tide. For years, they had dictated the terms of my life. Now I held the pen. After the sale of the house was finalized and the money wired into my account, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in years, my life wasn't tied to Claudia's phone calls or Miles's endless demands. But I knew one last thing remained, cutting every cord they could still tug on. The first cord was the joint account I had set up for Claudia when she was in college. For years, I had fed that account like a leaking faucet, $500 a month, never asked, never thanked. When the banker told me the balance had swelled to $28,000 because they hadn't touched it. Recently, I signed the closure papers without hesitation. Watching the funds transfer into my private account felt like shutting a door that had been left open too long. Next was the car. The black Mercedes GLS had already been sold, but Miles's second toy, a cherry red convertible Porsche, still sat in my storage unit. He'd parked it there months earlier, claiming the HOA at his gated community wouldn't allow excess vehicles. The truth was simpler. He wanted to hide how much luxury he was flaunting while asking me for help with bills. The DMV accepted my abandoned property claim. 30 days later, the title was in my name, and I sold it for $62,000 cash. The dealer handed me the check, and I remember thinking, this is the price of deceit converted into my freedom. With every step, I was reclaiming not just money, but dignity. For too long, my generosity had been a leash. They pulled, I followed. Now the leash was cut, but financial ties were only half of it. The harder task was emotional. For decades, Claudia had been my only child, the one Lavina and I poured our hopes into. Every lie she told, every cruel word still carried the weight of that bond. To truly be free, I had to confront it head on. That chance came one evening when Claudia showed up at my new apartment unannounced. She wasn't alone. Miles stood behind her, arms, folded, eyes burning with contempt. She looked around the modest living room with its simple oak furniture and view of the park as if insulted by the simplicity. "This is where you live now?" she asked, disbelief dripping from her voice. "Yes," I replied evenly. "It's enough for me." She laughed bitterly. "You sold the mansion, the cars, you closed the accounts. For what? To sit here like some old man in a box. We could have had a future together, Dad. All of us as a family." I leaned on my cane and looked her in the eyes. Family doesn't abandon each other in Aspen. Family doesn't forge medical reports to have a father declared incompetent. You wanted a future with my money, not with me. Her face tightened, but she pressed on. "You'll regret this when you're sick and alone." Miles chimed in, his voice sharp. "You think you won, all you did was waste decades of savings. You could have left it to us, to your grandchildren." "My grandchildren," I said, voice steady. "Hazel and David haven't called me in years. You made sure of that. Don't stand there pretending this was about them." Claudia's eyes flickered a crack in her mask. For a moment I saw not the polished insurance agent, but the little girl who used to tug at my sleeve asking for another bedtime story. Then it was gone, replaced by cold fury. "I can't believe you'd do this to your own blood," she whispered. "And I can't believe my own blood would do what you did to me," I answered. The silence stretched. Then I opened the door and gestured toward the hall. "It's time for you both to leave. This is my home now, and you are not welcome here." They left without another word, their footsteps echoing down the corridor. When the door shut, I leaned against it, my heart pounding. It hurt, of course it hurt. But it also felt like the final cut of a surgeon's scalpel, painful yet necessary for healing. That night, as I sat by the window with a cup of tea, I realized I had finally severed the last thread. Money, property, even sentiment, all untangled. For the first time in years, I was not waiting for Claudia's approval or Miles's schemes. My life was my own. And as strange as it sounds, the quiet felt like company. After Claudia and Miles walked out of my apartment that night, The silence was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was mine. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. I felt like the host. With $500,000 safely in my accounts, I had choices again. And at 79, choices are a luxury more valuable than any Mercedes or marble foyer. I decided to use them wisely. The first step was simple travel. Not the kind of travel Claudia bragged about online, 5-star resorts, designer luggage, endless cocktails. I booked a modest river cruise down the Mississippi, a trip Lavina and I had once dreamed of but never managed to take. My cabin was small, but it had a balcony. I spent hours sitting there watching the shoreline roll by, letting the water carry away years of bitterness. On that cruise, I wasn't Dad the ATM or Grandpa the burden. I was just Franklin, a widower with stories, a man who still laughed at corny jokes, who still loved a good blues band on deck under the stars. Other travelers asked about my life, and for the first time in decades, I told my story without hesitation, without shame. I realized that strangers sometimes treat you with more dignity than your own blood. When I returned home, I joined a community center not far from my apartment. They had book clubs, chess tournaments, even watercolor classes. At first, I was hesitant. I'd spent too many years isolating myself, waiting for Claudia's occasional call. But slowly, I found myself looking forward to Tuesday nights with the chess group, or Sunday afternoons painting landscapes I hadn't tried since college. One man in particular, Harold, became a close friend. He was 76, a retired architect, with a booming laugh and an old Labrador that followed him everywhere. We bonded over our shared experiences of being dismissed by our families once we'd stopped handing out money. They think the wallet is the man, Harold joked once, and when the wallet closes, so does their affection. It felt good to laugh about it, instead of carrying it like a wound. Financially, I allowed myself small luxuries, not the kind that screamed excess, but the kind that whispered comfort. I bought a leather recliner for my living room, a set of high-quality cooking pans, and a turntable with a stack of vinyl records from the 60s. Little things, but each one a reminder this is for me, not for them. One Saturday, as I sat on the balcony of my apartment sipping a glass of wine I'd chosen myself, not the bottle Claudia or Miles thought was appropriate for me, I realized something profound. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their presence to validate my existence. For too long, I had believed that family, no matter how cruel, was something you had to cling to. But family without love is just a contract of blood. And contracts can be broken. I hadn't spoken to Claudia or Miles since that night. There were no more voicemails, no more letters slipped under my door. It was as if they had finally accepted that the well had run dry. And in their absence, I found peace. Hazel and David, my grandchildren, were still distant. Maybe one day they'd reach out, maybe not. But I no longer lived in that waiting room of maybe. I lived in the present, where the air was lighter and the walls didn't echo with demands. As the months passed, my days filled with simple joys, morning walks in the park, coffee with neighbors, evenings reading in my recliner, with old records spinning softly in the background. Some nights I caught myself smiling for no reason at all. That was when I knew I hadn't just cut ties. I had been reborn. The life I was building wasn't glamorous. It wouldn't impress anyone scrolling on a phone. But it was real, and it was mine. There's a certain quiet that only comes when you've made peace with yourself. I used to think peace meant reconciliation, mending fences with Claudia, convincing Miles to see me as more than a wallet. But I learned the hard way that peace isn't something others can give you. It's something you claim for yourself, often at the cost of letting people go. Most mornings now, I wake before dawn, make a cup of coffee, and sit by the window overlooking the park. The sun rises slow, painting the sky pink and gold. In those moments, I whisper a short prayer. Not a plea for things to change, but a thank you for the strength to endure, the wisdom to let go, and the years still left for me to live in dignity. Faith has become less about rituals and more about trust that God saw me through betrayal in Aspen, through courtrooms and lonely nights, and led me here to this quiet place where my soul can finally breathe. Financially, I'm comfortable. With nearly $500,000 in savings, I don't need to fear running out of money, nor do I need to bend to anyone's demands. I live modestly, a one-bedroom apartment, a small balcony with a view of the lake, but it feels like a palace because it is free of manipulation and control. Every item in this home was chosen by me, paid for by me, used by me. There's a kind of holy satisfaction in that. Sometimes neighbors invite me to dinner. Other times I share a game of chess with Harold at the community center, or simply sit in the courtyard watching children play. I don't try to force joy anymore. I let it come as it pleases, like sunlight through a half-open curtain. One evening as I listened to an old vinyl of Louis Armstrong, I thought of Lavina. She would have loved the life I've built, not the money or the recliner, but the courage it took to stand up for myself after so many years of silence. I could almost hear her voice. You finally did it, Franklin. You finally learned to choose yourself. I don't know if Hazel or David will ever call me. Maybe one day they'll want to know my side of the story, not just the poisoned version Miles and Claudia told. If they do, I'll be here. If they don't, I'll still be here, living, breathing, grateful. There's an old verse that says, "The truth will set you free." I used to think it was just words, but now after everything I feel it in my bones. The truth freed me from false family ties, from financial chains, from the lie that I was nothing without their approval. And when my time comes, I hope they don't remember me for the battles or the bank accounts, but for the man who refused to bow down to lies. The man who found peace in the end, with himself, with God, with life. I used to believe that old age meant shrinking into the shadows, surviving on whatever scraps of attention your family decided to throw your way. I thought my story would end quietly, with Claudia making all the decisions, Miles counting the dollars, and me fading into the background, like a piece of furniture no one noticed anymore. But life has a way of surprising you, and sometimes the greatest surprises are born out of the deepest betrayals. When they left me stranded in Aspen, I thought it was the end. Instead, it became my beginning. Through the courts, through the sales, through the long nights of doubt and anger, I discovered something I had almost forgotten: the power to choose. And choice, I learned, is the first step to freedom. I look around my apartment now, modest walls, simple furniture, a balcony that faces the park. By the world's standards, it isn't much. But to me it is more than any mansion with marble staircases or imported chandeliers. Because every inch of this space belongs to me, and only me. No one dictates where I sit, what I eat, or how I live. That is a kind of wealth money alone can't buy. Yes, I have financial security. The sales of the mansion, the cars, the accounts I closed, all of it added up to nearly $500,000. But what I treasure even more is the lesson behind it. When you stop letting people use you as their safety net, you learn how strong your own wings really are. Money gave me room to breathe, but dignity gave me the air itself. And through it all, my faith held me steady. Each night I bow my head and whisper thanks, not for riches, not for revenge, but for the strength to endure, for the clarity to see truth through lies, for the peace that settled in my soul once I finally let go of the illusion of family that had long ago abandoned me. I used to pray for Claudia to come back to me. Now I pray for her heart to heal even if I never see it happen. That's what faith does. It softens bitterness without excusing betrayal. Do I still think about Hazel and David, my grandchildren? Of course. Blood ties run deep, and love doesn't vanish overnight. Maybe one day they'll call, maybe they'll want to know the truth, not just the version Claudia and Miles fed them. If that day comes, I'll open my door. But I no longer live in that waiting room of maybe. I live here now, and I am at peace. Some evenings when the sky turns orange and the first stars blink awake, I put on one of my old vinyl records and let the music wash over me. I sit in my leather chair, close my eyes, and remember Lavina's laughter. Her hand in mine, her belief that dignity was worth defending even when it cost you everything. I think she would be proud that I finally listened. If you're listening to me now, maybe you felt the same sting being used, dismissed, or treated like you were nothing once the money stopped. Let me tell you, you are not nothing. You are more than what they take from you. You still have a voice, a choice, and a life worth living. And here's what I ask from you: drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Share this story if you know someone who feels trapped or forgotten. Because stories like these aren't just mine, they belong to all of us who refuse to let betrayal be the final chapter. I've learned that family drama stories don't always end with hugs around the table. Sometimes they end with a man in his late 70s sitting alone in a quiet apartment, finally breathing free. And sometimes that ending is better than the fairy tale we once begged for. So I'll leave you with this. I am Franklin Reed, 79 years old. My daughter and her husband thought they could erase me, control me, strip me of everything I built. But with faith in God, with courage, and with dignity, I took it all back. And I am no longer afraid. In the end, this was more than just betrayal. It was a journey of reclaiming dignity, faith, and freedom. Stories like mine remind us that even in the deepest pain, there is strength waiting to rise. Thank you for joining me here on Brian's Story, where we bring family drama stories to life and prove that it's never too late to take back your peace.